All right, so now we start what's called the second tablet, maybe. Okay. The Catechism says the fourth commandment opens the second table of the Decalogue. It shows us the order of charity. God has willed that after him we should honor our parents, to whom we owe life and who have handed on to us the knowledge of God. We are obliged to honor and respect all those whom God, for our good, has vested with his authority. All right, so the question we sort of start with is there an ordering? So we already saw the ordering, right? Like the first tablet we said had to deal with what we owe to God or our relationship with God. And then we said, okay, the second tablet is our relationship to neighbors, love of neighbor. But is there a logic to the actual ordering, or does God just throw in, it's like, oh, well, we'll just start here at the fourth commandment, where you're supposed to honor your parents. So why is the first commandment on the second tablet dealing with parents specifically? Okay, so you owe them the most after God. Why? Okay, so they gave you life. Why else? I mean, that certainly is part of it.
Is it have to do at all with how the relationship between parents and their children is kind of a sign for the Trinity?
Yeah, I mean, that getting a little bit ahead of what we're going to talk about. Yes, like the heavenly imaging that goes on in the family. Why else? Well, let's back up a little bit. As now, as young adults, what do you owe your parents? Could you ever repay your parents for what they've done for you? Okay. Why? Okay, definitely can't repay someone for your life. Anything else? That's, again, there's not really necessarily a right answer to this, but I just want to get you kind of thinking about like the inner logic of why God starts there. Do you owe your spouse more than you owe your parents? Okay, so we're going to talk about responsibility versus owe. Why don't we come back to that? Kevin or Nicole, whoever asked that question. If I don't answer that question before we're done, let's come back to it. I don't want to get us off here, but there's, I think, something that will kind of summarize what we're going to talk about today if we come back to that question. Right. So what was my question? Yeah. What does it mean then? Like, if you can never repay your parents, you can never in justice give them what they are owed, then what do you owe them? Honor. Okay. What does that mean? Like, what if there's a picture on my mantle? Is that enough? Do you owe them obedience? Yes, Megan. You can come in here, you know. Okay, well, that would be a good reason not to sit in here.
Yeah, so basically, like, honor simply means to regard with great respect. It's in the word term. So respect doesn't necessarily inherently mean obedience, as long as it's like being able to correct. Respect your parents by honoring them. That's like the way that you should honor them. And at the moment that you are emancipated them, you do not necessarily have to fully obey them.
Okay, so Megan is making the distinction between obedience and respect.
Don't
Kevin, were you going to say something? All right. So we'll come back again to that in a minute, but let's sort of talk about why it starts there, right? Because love of neighbor starts with, it's not without accident that God says love your neighbor, right? Because who is your neighbor? Somebody who's close to you, right? Like, so it's not accidental that he doesn't say just love some guy, right? Like, it says love your neighbor, right? And often the people who are closest to us are the most difficult, right? For various reasons, right? But there's another reason why, that if you've heard me say this before, when we talk about contraception, sometimes I'll say that if you're willing to use the person you're closest to, you'll use anybody, right? I mean, that's pretty much a given if you're willing to use the person you're closest to. If you don't honor the people you're closest to, giving them what they are owed, giving them what they are due, you won't give it to anybody, right? And I know that in our mind, it seems a little bit backwards, but the point is that it's often harder, but it's harder because it's necessary and because it then spills over to all the other relationships. And this all makes sense as we begin to talk about it. So this commandment is expressed in positive terms of duties to be fulfilled. And then what I want to sort of get at with this commandment is that it really is, underneath it is hiding a whole bunch of other stuff that has to do with how we live. It introduces the subsequent commandments, which are concerned with particular respect for life, marriage, earthly goods, and speech. It constitutes one of the foundations of the social doctrine of the church. All right, so let's look at the, really struggling here with this. The commandment itself, and then we can begin to answer my first question about what it means to honor them. All right, so the commandment is honor your father or your mother, and your mother, sorry, that your days may be long in the land which the Lord God gives you. So St. Paul in Ephesians reminds us that this is the only commandment in which there's a promise attached to it. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is just. Honor thy father and thy mother, which is the first commandment, with a promise that it may be well with thee and thou mayest be long lived upon earth. Okay, so honoring your parents is three things, all right? The first is veneration, all right? Holding them up, honoring them. You guys sort of understand what that already means, right? Like, to Megan's point. To show obedience to them as teachers. Okay, that's really important. Like, so do you owe your parents obedience now? Yes. But as teachers, right? Because the teaching of parents never stops. Okay, it's just in a different, it looks in a different way, right? And we'll talk about what that means in a second when we go where their authority actually is, okay? And then you honor them for the fact that you could never repay all that they've done for you, okay? So for instance, like a lot of people have not had good upbringings, right? Have difficult parents, but the way in which you should live is always render to your parents what they're due, right? So in other words, parents may have been really bad, but if they need help, you help them, okay? That's the idea, all right? So you always render to them what they do and at the heart of that is forgiveness, right? Forgiveness simply just means like, I don't forget, but I restore justice in a relationship where it was broken, right? All of this, right? This is the bigger, now we begin to expand. All of this, what's implicit in this is that there's a proper ordering to the family, right? And this is why when we start with second tablet, we're going to talk about the family and marriage today, okay? So all of this assumes that there's a proper ordering to the family, and then why this proper ordering is necessary, we're going to talk about, all right, and what it looks like. So you've probably seen this quote before, but Sister Lucia, who was the Fatima visionary who lived to be 97, I think, she wrote a letter to then Cardinal Cafaro, who has since passed away. And she said this, she said, a time will come when the decisive battle between the kingdom of Christ and Satan will be over marriage and the family. Why does, I mean, does anyone think that that is not prophetic at all? We all agree that like she had a pretty good feel for it, right? And then at the end, we'll talk about why she probably did. So why does marriage and family matter so much that Satan would target it? Yes, right. Go ahead. Yeah, I said why does Satan want to destroy marriage and family? Go ahead, Meg.
Yeah, so if you think about it, what is the purpose of the family? Often, that is where unfortunately Catholics come from, and social media. If you raise someone from the start point in a good, healthy faith life, the likelihood of them following the sin will be lessened. And so, like, if there's less sin in this world, good, like, healthy, happy families around. And like Satan, of course, literally hates that. That's literally exactly what he's against. So that's what he's going to do there for its happen.
Okay, so if I summarize what you just said.
Society. If the family collapses, so the society, you can look at pre-World War II, and you can see that. It's one of the best examples. I literally was talking about it in my Holocaust class. And so like what happened and why things happened. My favorite reason is the collapse of the family. And the site was existing our return to the So like it's just like, of course that's the same thing that we attack. The one thing that we so deeply desire and want also to what prevents sin from entering this world, raising people to not sin.
Okay, so you said two things are really important. The first is that if you want to destroy the church, destroy the domestic church. If I summarize what you said, right? If you want to destroy the church, destroy the domestic church first, right? Because that's where's the next generation of the church coming from? Families, right? Catholic families. And then the second, which we're going to come back to in a little while, is the fact that the family is the foundation of society. And we'll come back to that in a second. What were you going to say, Ryan?
Concretely understand total self-giving and love, then it makes it a lot harder to understand God all the more for it.
Yeah, so again, kind of summarize what you're saying is that the family is a window into heaven, right? So it shows the Trinity, right? It also shows the relationship of Christ to the church. Somebody who grew up in a family with no father, you begin to talk to them about God the Father, they're like, that doesn't make sense to me. Like, or they say, like, I want nothing to do with God the Father, right? And so it's the place where God's life-giving love is revealed. All right. Second is that it's also the place where we gain our identity. Right? Think about that. Part of our identity is where we come from, right? And the family lets us know that we came from love, right? And that we are loved, and that we are made by love. Right? And we'll talk all about that when we get to the sixth commandment. But it's also the stability of which fulfills our nature, right? So family is a natural institution, and it's a school of virtue. It's where we learn how to be virtuous. We learn how to get along with other people. We learn from our parents how to interact with people of the opposite sex. All of those things. We learn how to be self-giving. We learn how to put other people first, right? And the strength of which our family is, that's proportional to what we're going to become, right? And again, it's not impossible, but when we talk about divorce in a minute, we'll talk about sort of the opposite. All right, so let's define our terms. What is the family? All right, a man and a woman united in marriage, Catechism says this, a man and a woman united in marriage, together with their children, form a family. This institution is prior to any recognition by public authority, which has an obligation to recognize it. It should be considered the normal reference point by which the different forms of family relationship are to be evaluated. Right? That's a long definition. Let's just look at my short one. The family is a communion of a husband, wife, and their children. What's a communion? Why did I use the word communion? Why did I just say a community? Is there a communion or in a community? One kind of what? Like, no, what you're saying, you're there. Just finish the sentence. One kind of what? They share what? Like, what is communion? Like when we receive communion, what's going on? We're sharing what? Life, right? Yeah. So a communion, right? A communion is just this multitude of persons, i.e., two or more, in which there's a shared life together. All right. And because it's a sharing of the whole life, it has to be a lifelong. You can't just divorce your family, right? You can't just get rid of your family, right? It has to be lifelong, right? And it has notice that very specifically, it is a husband and a wife and their children, all right? So Connor and Aaron are married, but they are not a family, right? Because if they wanted to start a family, what would they do? Have a child, right? So a family is a communion, right? That idea ought to be, ought to then trigger why I said it was a window into heaven, right? About why the family is meant to be a sign of the Trinity. Yes, Ryan.
So just to clarify, he adopts a child, not conceived.
No.
Divorced parent, not a family. That means just five.
Yeah, so getting into like the weeds of like exceptions a little bit hard. But what is important for us to understand is that that the family has to be founded upon marriage, right? But that doesn't necessarily mean, for example, like that, I don't know, let's just say that the husband dies, right, and leaves a wife and other children. Like, did they somehow cease to be a family, right? Like that, like I don't want it to be like so defined that we miss the point of that. But can you blend and just somehow call something that's a family that's not? Can you say a man and a man with a child is a family? No, that's not a family, right? Despite what culture says, right? Because the family is a natural institution, right? Something that fulfills our nature. And then we'll talk about why that matters in just a second. Okay, so Megan already said that the family is the foundation of society. She's read her catechism, which is awesome. She's sitting back there studying it now. It is a natural society. Okay, so it's a natural society of nature. So it has a definitive form, right? And in a sense that it fulfills our nature. It is a natural society in which husband and wife are called to give themselves in love and in the gift of life. Authority, which we'll talk about in a second, stability, and a life of relationships within the family constitute the foundations for freedom, security, and fraternity, all of what we already said within society. The family is a community in which from childhood one can learn moral values, begin to honor God, and make good use of freedom. Family life is an initiation into life in society. Okay, so this idea of the family as the foundation of society is pretty much antithetical to what our culture is built upon. Right? American culture is built on the individual as the sort of the foundation of society. Okay, but that's not a Catholic understanding at all. All right, so we can play a little game, and I may have done this already with you. So, should women have the right to vote? Megan's shaking her head yes. Okay, so what's the purpose of voting? why do we vote? To choose representatives, right? Government representatives, all right? Okay, so Megan, you shook your head yes. And I'm gonna be a total fence sitter on this, but why did you say yes? Yeah, I really want to know why you said yes. Like, why do you think women should have the right to vote?
I think it's really people who are going to actually.
Okay. Anybody? Megan's getting a little. She's a little excited about this. Yeah. Anybody want to take that on? Connor's going to take it on.
I think the counter argument would be that inside of a society in which family is seen as the building block, there's natural different roles, and one of roughly divide those roles between those which are internal to the domestic sphere and external to the domestic sphere. And that since as a family unit, what is best for an individual within that family is going to be best for all individuals in that family. It should be one vote per family. And I'm going to go another step farther to say that since the division of roles, naturally, that the one has the internal domestic sphere, and then the external domestic sphere, the husband to be one of those.
Anybody want to take that on? Megan wants to take that on. Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
I just don't think.
All right. So
I have like an independence in there though, but like, sure, if you want to make that law, like family vote, but again, like, I don't have a husband. And like, Jesus isn't gonna vote for me.
okay.
So I think that in that case, I guess.
All right. So would you concede if you were married that what Connor said is true?
I don't know, because I don't live in that realm, I don't live in that sphere. I'm not married, never have been married. So like, I don't like.
That's reassuring.
I don't like, I imagine that like, okay, I'm not married, so like, I don't know what that's like, I guess, like, like Aaron and Connor have something that like, I don't really actually fully understand, because I'm not lived it, right? I imagine for them though, they agree on a lot of the same exact issues being married, and like, see that, but like, again, like, that's why I'm like, I don't really know if I can speak to that, but I can speak to that as a single woman, I'm gonna be able to vote. Because like, that's respecting my rights, and like, that's like, me protecting my rights.
Okay.
Also, no man's gonna do that for me right
All right. So go ahead, Ryan.
Not every person in the family will agree on what's best. So like, okay, the dad picks something. Well, my dad is gonna like completely different things, both in general, for like what he thinks society would be best with. Like what I'm gonna do is gonna do what's best. Also, he's not thinking about the same things I'm thinking about. So he's not gonna be able to accurately speak for me.
So when we do discussing this in like the context of like practicality or like in an ideal moral society.
Well, we would start with the ideal, right? And then we can like, that's the problem, right? You always go to the ideal. And then you can't go practical. You can't go practical first. You got to go ideal first. Right. So what I'm trying to sort of at least open your mind to is putting aside like thinking that like women's suffrage was all about misogyny, and understand that there were valid arguments for why that was the case. And that valid argument was along the lines of what Connor was saying, that if really the society is made up of a collection of families, then subsidiarity would say, well, you go to the authority within that sphere, and they decide how there's going to be interaction between them. Now, I haven't yet dealt with because there are exceptions, right? Like what Megan's saying is totally valid, right? Like, okay, I'm an adult, I'm a single woman. Where do I fit into that? That's a different, like, I just want to Heisman her right now, just like push her aside, because that would be an exception that we could deal with, right? Principles can allow exceptions. But I think what we need to get at is to go, okay, wait a second. Does it make sense that if we're really building society the way we say we are, that you simply, subsidiarity says, okay, who should make, even if there's disagreement, right? Who should make the decision? Who is the representative of the family that can choose to their representative, the family's representative in government? Go ahead, Ryan, you were going to say something else. Yeah, that's a little bit of, so yeah, so as compared to like the women's suffrage movement, it's a way bigger exception than it was then, right? Because normally a woman would go from being under the authority of her father to being under the authority of her husband, and it would be a seamless transition in the sense of like within, you know, a very short period of time, at a relatively young age. So admittedly, the time is different. What I don't necessarily want you to walk out of here and go, well, women shouldn't vote. That's not really what I'm saying. What I'm trying to grasp, though, is the fact that if we really look at structures of how society is formed, we have to take that into account. Right. And I could have probably thought of a different example, but I figured this was provocative enough to get Megan out of her books so she'd participate. No, I know. I'm teasing you. Yeah, I'm teasing you. I'm totally teasing you. But the point again, like, is to just understand, okay, wait, what Connor's argument was totally makes sense. Right now, could it be practically lived out at this stage? I'm not sure. Like, could we go back just to go but can we call people misogynists for defending it? Not necessarily, right? Because they saw society structured a certain way. Right. And because of that, like our culture, like, you know, is a father, in a rugged individualistic society, is a father really looking out for like Megan has to look out for her rights. Like, is a father really looking out for the rights of his children? Maybe not, because we've been trained not to be, right? Yes. I mean, he could send his wife, that's fine. And she could do, like, he could whatever, like, defer to her. Yes. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, this was not, I mean, that's the first example that came to mind, but I'm sure there's other ones. But I knew I'd get engagement if I picked something that was totally countercultural. Yeah, you all just got clickbaited. But the point is, right, like, and Megan summarized it well, right? Society is not made up of individuals, it's made up of families. And so it is natural that the family would be a voting unit, would be a unit, you know. So in other words, every unit in society would really be about the family, right? And then, yes, Michael, what are you gonna ask? Oh, dude, did you have to do that? I'm just kidding.
Well, like voting's like a sign of like.
No, not necessarily. I mean, there are, I mean, okay, so ideal in the sense of unfallen, no. But ideal in the sense of like what would work best, even like in a fallen world, then yeah, voting could still be a thing, right? I mean, think about, I mean, there's all kinds of ways in which God could, like, a virtuous people that votes is a good thing.
I think that it might be useful to clarify what you mean by like an ideal society. So we're still talking about like fallen society, but in which like the majority.
Yeah, nothing. I'm not talking about. Yeah, I'm not talking about utopia. I'm just talking about, okay, like we have a moral people, and is it reasonable for a moral people for God to appoint leaders through the people? Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think that like the power argument there is that like, I think one of the arguments for democracy is that like in the absence of the ability to like universally determine like kind of what the majority, granted with like protections for the majority determines should be like the law of the land, but like if you truly have like an ideal society in the sense of like people are like seeking virtue and like are in general moral, then I think that like there would be less disagreement on what is good for society. So like in that sense, Like, I don't think voting would really be necessary.
Yeah, well, the disagreement would be what is the best way to carry out the good. So a virtuous society, everyone would agree on what the good is, but they might disagree on how best that, right? And that's not, I mean, we'll talk about this more next week, but that can even happen like, you know, in maybe St. Joseph and Mary could have disagreed about the best way to handle something, right? Even though they both were locked in on the good, right? And then Mary would have deferred to Joseph. Which, if you begin to think about that for a second, right? Like that's how strong the family is, right? Like that, you know, the sinless one would defer to St. Joseph, which is okay because he's pretty good himself, I guess. Connor, were you going to ask a question?
Kevin.
Oh, Kevin's got his. Oh, this is Kevin. All right, Kevin, what's your question?
Yeah, so
Nicole
about,
is disavowing you, by the way.
what about the whole like it takes a village kind of thing? Like, you know, like I thought, at least
said
on their
that?
website or something, the Black Lives Matter was like, forget the family, like we need village mentality or something like that, you know,
Yeah.
like versus individualism.
Yeah. So we'll talk about that at the end, the village mentality. But yeah, but that doesn't exactly. That doesn't work. And we'll talk about why, right? Like, does the village actually love the child? Not really, right? So we'll come back to the village mentality. If I don't answer it, then we can talk more about it. All right. So if I didn't irritate the ladies in the room enough with the question about voting, now we can talk about authority in the family. Human society can be neither well-ordered nor prosperous unless it has some people invested with legitimate authority to preserve its institutions and to vote themselves as far as is necessary to work and care for the good of all. So let's get a little definition about what authority is. The right of a society to direct and compel the members to cooperate toward the attainment of the end of that society. All right, so is the family a society? Did we decide that? We decided the family is a society, right? Shake your head, Jess. So if it has a society, does it have to have an authority? Okay. Who is that authority? The husband, right? Or the father? Why? Okay. I mean, so a sacramental argument is fine. Like that's, no, so we call God the Father because he revealed himself, because that's his name. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's the yes, Megan. Thank you for fact checking me, by the way. It's awesome.
Christ is in heaven. Never say for another word that's we're all Christ-like, only so.
Mhm.
And if you like put that to the family, only one can be the head. And it's been designated that it's needed. And like it's in a way that like they are in the same way Christ is a giver, the same way God is a giver. The male is the giver in that relationship, and the woman is the receiver. Not to say that women are not just as important, not to say that women like, can't think for themselves. It is just meant to say like this is like the God to be the best. This is God is the best way. And so like the male is that giver, and the woman is that receiver. So the male is that authority to the relationship. Okay. So again, sort of building on the sacramental understanding of sacramental small s of how the family images God and images Christ's relationship with the church. Okay, so you still haven't sort of answered. So you gave me reasons in the sense of like, why does it have to be the man though? Why can't when they get married, why can't they just decide? Like who's gonna wear the pants, literally? Well, I mean, maybe they could get together and go, you know what, like, I don't want to wear the pants.
Maybe the scriptural argument that they're
Where?
She just-
All right, so there is that, right? But even in a family where, like, so is it natural for the man to be the head of the family? Patrick, you're shaking your head. Yes. Keep going.
I think
Though.
so.
Like, why?
I think so.
You think so? Why? Kevin?
Okay, so men, are naturally, usually stronger than women. So
Okay.
I take that to mean, they, not that they have a different nature than women, but they really need to be the protectors. And so it makes sense for them to have the authority so they can carry out their mission of like protecting the woman.
Okay. That would be I would definitely agree with what you're saying. Patrick, were you going to say something?
I was trying to think through it first.
Okay. Maybe Connor can help you.
I think it's, again, so we're talking about virtue, we're talking about what's the right ordering. And so I think if we look at the nature of men and women and just their relationship to each other, what both finds actually leads them to happiness, we see that there is a natural tendency in a man to want to be leading, protecting, providing. And we see there's a natural tendency in a woman to want to be seen as an object of love and affection and value, and to be honored as a woman deserves. And then also this is, I'll add a small point. I think it's interesting. I was listening to a video earlier this week that it was somebody speaking about hormones. It's actually somebody trying to talk about how to, I guess, make yourself feel more powerful or something like that. But in that same video, this person, who I assume was probably more of a liberal persuasion, talking about like testosterone as like this kind of like power hormone. Like it makes you feel more assertive, it makes you handle stress better, like, or at least it correlated with like at least these studies would be used. The same things that give you more testosterone also give you less cortisol, so it's giving lower stress, better stress resistance. And I thought about it, I was like, so the same person would probably horribly object to the idea that men are like kind of more naturally in the leadership role. They will say, but it would say sex that has a vastly higher degree of testosterone just naturally is of course going to be more fulfilled by the leadership role and more easily able to fulfill the duties.
Yeah.
It's more naturally.
Yeah, we only follow the science when it agrees with what we're saying, right? Ultimately. So men, kind of summarizing everything you guys have said, because you guys are more or less on the reason, right? So men by their very nature are the laborers, right? And the defenders, like it's in their body. Like they are the bigger ones, the stronger ones. And so they provide the means to sustain the family. And the woman by nature gestates, bears, and nourishes the children, right? So her, again, by nature. And so the man, because he is free from that particular burden, is also free to judge what is best, right? So he is by nature, right? And then if we raise it to this, right, by the grace of the sacrament, right, they have a grace of state or a grace of office, right, that conforms them. So marriage, the sacrament of marriage, sacramentally conforms the man to Christ as head of the church. Now, all that being said, a couple of, yes, Patrick.
So this is women being subordinate to men. Is this something that happens post-fall or
So it would have happened no matter what. Because again, like think about what I said, Adam and Eve could have both been ordered to the good, right? Like again, use like St. Joseph and Mary, right? They could still disagree about how to carry out some good. That's just like having independent thoughts, and both ways could be could work just as easily. Somebody's got to yield, right? So authority is not, and we're going to talk about this more next week, because like I think it's James Madison talks about if men were angels, they wouldn't need government, which is totally false. And his point is that government or authority in general is because we're fallen, and that's not the case. Ryan, what were you going to ask? Then I got you, Megan, too.
I'm not disagreeing with like, yes, men being the head of them, but why is it
to think more clearly.
Not more, think more clearly. I didn't say that. Like, make sure, like, yeah, so they are free to judge because they're not tied to the inside management of the home. So in other words, they because of their state, they see the relationship between what's outside the world by nature, outside of the society, the family, and what's inside. So they're observers, right? So think about, like, God says to Eve, or says to Adam, I'll make you a helpmate. What that really sort of means, right, is, well, Adam's ultimately responsible for everything that goes on there, but that she is the manager of the, for lack of a better word, of the family, while he is sort of like the overseer. So he watches what goes on because of his position, and then sees what else goes on. So he's this conduit between inside the family and the outside. I didn't necessarily mean to say he was necessarily better at it. I just meant by nature, he has that freedom of moving back and forth. Yeah, and observing in the family, right? Because the wife is sort of the momager, I guess, would be the. Okay, anyway, what's your question?
That's cool.
Okay.
Go out and have sex with other men, smokes kind of woman, but I mean like the modern woman is like she wears like you could argue, and I've heard the argument made, they see, especially outside of it, as a man that in that distance as well. So how do you work with that? The other thing is, wouldn't you say that the fall executes exactly why the importance of a good, healthy authority figure is so important?
Yeah, I mean, it's necessary. Like, don't get me wrong, it was necessary before. It's even more necessary now.
Well, that's what I meant, but like, the fall, I think, illustrates it well. With, like, he fell because her authority figure
Yes.
is one I did.
Yeah.
But back to the modern woman.
Yeah.
Can you answer that part for me? 'Cause I get it, I don't mind.
Without like totally getting in trouble.
I mean, you get in trouble as long as you answer it
Yeah,
well.
no, I think that I think that pull outside the home, and again, there's circumstances where that's totally necessary. I get that, but in general, the massive pull outside the home is ultimately predicated on a lie, and the lie to the woman is you will never be satisfied just being a mom, right?
But
Like,
then, would you say then that like if like I'm just married, so like in case of like they currently have no children, so it's okay for them to we're gonna have children. So that really main practice part.
yeah, no, I mean, I would say in all things, yeah.
We do not plan, we plan to have parents that we have children.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
but I meant like, but like I don't mean.
Yeah,
like,
so in general, like, could I say like Aaron is doing something wrong?
yeah, so
But
that's what I'm kind of asking.
now I don't know that I can make a blanket statement like that.
Okay.
I mean, there could be plenty of situations where, like, I mean, like economics, right, means home management, right? And for the longest time, women still contributed to the home management by making clothes, which they no longer do. They might, they might do little side jobs.
Less about that, about like if I want to work and they're willing to work, and I'm sick.
I would say that would totally
Like,
depend.
there's no reason to work outside the home other than I'm doing my job.
And you had children? Yeah, I would say that would be something you would really need to like check.
I just asked.
Yeah.
because I hear this often. I
Yeah.
hear talk about this often. Like,
Yeah, so the question would be, okay, you don't need to work. What is it? And I can do this because you're hypothetically me to death. The question would be, well, why aren't you satisfied just being a mom? Like that would be the question that would immediately come to mind, right?
No, that's perfect.
Yeah.
That's what I-
Yeah, that would be the question I would ask someone, like I mean, there are situations again where like that's why I don't want to say like, okay, any mom working, but I mean, there's plenty of data that suggests it's way better for like moms to be home. Like our economy, honestly, would be way better off if if there weren't two income households. That's just a reality, right? Yeah, well, so we've created that though, right? We've created that because we've created a society in which, man, I'm going to get so much trouble for this, right? Where men and women now compete against each other in the job market, and men and women were never meant to compete, right? They're complementary. They're never meant to compete. And that, of course, is going to drive down wages, right? It's going to create an environment in which there's conflict in and outside of the family. So in general, it's not a good thing. But again, I'm off in ideal land a little bit, and that's not where we're at. But all things being equal, it would be better if it is possible for a mother not to be divided. And not to mention just the amount of unbelievable energy it takes for a woman to do both things, right? And in truth, she won't be satisfied with either in the end. And that's the part that like kind of a little bit breaks my heart, because it is predicated on a lie that, you know, being a mom is just not enough. That, you know, somehow, again, like that in and of itself, like femininity is not a beautiful thing. Like it's only beautiful in the sense of where they can also be like men, right? And that's, again, a lie. All right, are we deep enough in this?
Rob, what about like, I don't know, I guess the whole like you talked about magnanimity. I guess it kind of comes from maybe like a flawed sense of what really greatness is, but it kind of seems like if I want to be great, I need to like go and, you know, save Africa or something like that, you know, whereas like greatness would really be if I could just like love my family, you know, like.
Yeah, well, I mean, and in all honesty, like another question would be, okay, like you want to change the world and go out and work, like are you really going to, you have, you know, 18 years with this child that you can completely and totally form, like in which way is the world going to be changed more? You going to work and, you know, programming all day, or you going to your child and forming them to be eternal, like part, you know, saints for eternity? Yes, Ryan.
What happens, I mean, like, whether it be mental, that is something that like can drastically shape the lives of people. Where does that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that it isn't, the question isn't like, if I'm doing something great, I can put motherhood aside, right? The question is in doing this great thing of motherhood, is there room for something else? That would be the way to ask the question. Not like, there's no in my mind, just as there shouldn't be any compromise for me as a father, there's no compromise to be made. Like that is like, of God's will, I know what God's will is for me when it comes to my wife and my children. It's clear, right? It's in my vocation. And then anything else I do has to fit inside of that. And if it fits inside that, great. That's awesome. If it doesn't, then you're not doing something right. Yes, Megan. Don't apologize. That would be the best way to say it, yes.
Your vocation comes first, your job comes second. Don't ever mix that up.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. And again, it still goes back to why do you feel like that is actually necessary? And that's the thing you have to do.
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah. So she's basically just summarized what I said. She's like, so to hear you correctly, I think she was trying to get it on recording, I think, that I said. Yeah. Yeah. She said in essence, are you saying that if something fits, including a job, fits in the vocation of a mother, then it's fine. If it doesn't, then it shouldn't be there. And I said yes.
I have a question, Rob. So you said men should be observers in the home. How does that fit with having like an active role in raising your children?
Yeah, I didn't mean it in the sense of like observers as like sit on the couch and watch. Hey, this is pretty interesting. I just meant that they can, in a certain sense, be they can servant observers. I don't know if is that a thing. I just meant that they're in a certain sense they're outside of it in a way as an observer, not in the hey, look, things seem to be going really crazy here. All right, let's see. Yeah, I probably should get her some help. Like, it's not like that. I just mean it in the sense of like they can see from because they're outside of it somewhat, if that makes sense. But they should certainly go in and go, okay, wait, like here's a need. I need to step in there. But that's in essence how they do it anyway, right?
Rob, but you've talked before about how like the Industrial Revolution, kind of had this bad effect where like the father went outside of the home to do his work.
Mhm.
Like thinking about like the whole work from home thing, like how do you see that?
I think it's a step back in the right direction. I think it's good for especially young men to see their fathers working. I think it's good for young men to be around their fathers while they're working, or even just to be around their fathers during the day. But even just children in general, like even young girls, right, to see what their fathers what they look like when they work, because it gives a complete picture of what a man is supposed to be, so that when they go out and choose a spouse, that it somehow looks like that. So I do think that is one of the blessings of COVID. I know, like even in our own family, like my youngest son, who is homeschooled, me being there has totally changed him, and for the better. So that, and it's just, that's because he's a 13-year-old boy who's around his dad a lot. Yes.
I was gonna say to that exact point, I mean, we kind of think we've always thought of work as it has been for the last couple hundred years, like, the guy goes off to a factory or something like that, or goes off to, historically, going farther back, it felt like it did have men would like not see their families the entire day. Was
Yeah.
not always the norm.
Yeah, that separation. I mean, that was never really, that is a totally new thing where like a guy would go to work. What are you gonna say, Michael?
You want an example, like practically that was for yourself?
What do you mean?
You said like things have changed for the better because of it.
Well, I mean, for example, he does way more boy type things because he's interacting with a man all day long, right? So the other fallout from the Industrial Revolution, right, is not only did it separate young men from their fathers, watching them work, it also put them in schools with women teachers. And not anything necessarily wrong with that. I'm not bashing that. I'm just saying that their models of masculinity changed completely, right? They didn't have them any longer, right? Whereas in his case, it's just normal like just in the interaction he's having an interaction with a man during the day, right? That he wouldn't have had otherwise.
At the risk of, talking about like getting in trouble.
I mean, I'm already probably past that.
One of the verses that people don't like to talk about is like where St. Paul says that like I don't think that women should teach. Is that like kind of related to what you're saying about the women's first vocation should be to like her children and the family?
Yes.
And therefore teaching is like just doesn't fit within that role, or is there an additional like reason?
Yeah, well, some of that, like it's not a like a categorical like saying no. It is that he sees like her first vocation is in the home.
Okay.
But not necessarily. I don't think you should read that as women should never be teachers in the church, because there's plenty of women doctors in the church, right? Like I think it's more of just along those same lines, and in that he's also saying sort of in that like in the culture then, like that's how he saw things. Does that make sense? So it's not a like a categorical like women should never teach, right? Go ahead, Megan.
Maybe this is getting off the road, like why would say.
Yeah, I think I mean, and not to get too like, I think that is a very specific ordinance of St. Paul for the Corinthian church. I don't think that's meant to be. Yeah, but with the caveat, we could go totally, this would be a gigantic rabbit hole, so I don't want to go. With the caveat that it's also inspired and meant for everyone. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, and the church has never interpreted that as don't listen to women teachers. Yeah, thank you for not taking us totally down the rabbit hole. Yes.
explain, what are the stuff, but it's more of a teaching for priests. So that's
And preaching as well, preaching. Yeah. Yeah.
similar a lot, but specifically reacting as a priest. I don't know the name.
All right, so I think we've beat the authority thing to death, but one more thing. So where does, and this will move us in the other direction, where does the man's authority stop? Like what can he command and what can he not? Yes, Connor.
Specific relation to that position of authority or the general rules for all positions of authority?
Well, let's just go within the family. Like, so if he says, thou shalt not put butter on both pieces of toast in the morning, and is she under obedience to do that or not? Let's start there. So does everything the man says have to be obeyed? Yeah, assuming they're not immoral. Like, that's an obvious one, right? So that would be the first caveat, is it's not immoral. Okay, so there has to be an import to it, maybe. Anything else? Think about, again, this is what I want you to begin to think of, the family as a society, right? So let's back up to the state as, what have I said this 1,000 times? What is the role of the state? Yes. Protect and promote what though? What's the buzzword is? Common good. So all authority is for that. So what are the limits of the man's authority? The common good of the family, right? So if it does not pertain to the common good of the family, then he does not have authority, right? And this doesn't also mean, by the way, because the wife is a rational creature almost all the time. And so that does not mean that he doesn't counsel her or ask her questions or even defer to her sometimes. It's not like that. All right. But the point is that ultimately, like, the buck stops there. Like, and as men, you got to step up and understand that. And as women, you have to accept that and understand that keeps you spiritually protected. Okay. And so it's always, so for example, could the husband command how a child was to be educated? Yes, because it pertains to the common good. Could he command who the child marries? No, because it does not pertain to the common good of the family, right? Right, that would be another one. Yes. Yeah, that is not part of the common good. Yes, Connor.
So the other part that I realized there's in marriage you are both sacrament marriage works with sanctification of spouses, and that means both of you are ordered towards each other's sanctification. So is there a part of that where, again, you might have said this falls into the common good of the family, but there are, I guess the answer is obvious with kids. If kids are watching something where it's like, or they're going, and let's say they're going to, I'll do an outrageous example. If kids are going to a bar or something like that, shouldn't be, you're obviously allowed to say, no, you're not allowed to go to the bar. Now, let's say Aaron's not going to the bar. Let's say Aaron is just, pounding them back at the bar. And I'm like, hey, I guess again, that's a little bit more, that's like, this is the point a little bit, because that you could at that point say, okay, well, the wife being, the mother or wife being drunk is obviously not good for the family. It's scandalous. But taking smaller examples of, like, just thinking, okay, is this sinful?
Spending too much time on Facebook, right?
Sure.
That's a simple thing, right? Like, should a wife under obedience, her husband says, like, no more Facebook, like, that's enough. Should she obey?
Well, I guess necessarily should is a different question.
Or does she have, is she obligated to obey? And I would say if it's harming the common good of the family, yes.
How are you distinguishing between should and is obligated?
Yeah, I guess I shouldn't have said should. I shouldn't have even used should. There's no like should makes it seem like like I'd rather just go ought she obey rather than should. I shouldn't have even used the word should. That just makes it really muddy. Yes, Patrick.
What about like how trivial can you go? Because like with, for example, with like the buttering 2 pieces of bread, you can be like, oh, that's bad for health. So like if the husband's just like no more.
Yeah. So I would say at the level of, I mean, there's not always a like, I don't know, that has a very like Bill de Blasio feel to it, right? Like where you're like, don't drink soda with straws. I mean, there can obviously be like minutia that's just too far, right? But there can also be certain things like the wife is diabetic and, the husband says, okay, you can't have Skittles at all because of what it ends up doing to you. And she will always, the thing is trivial, and in the end, like, okay, they didn't really have the authority to do that. You've done it, like you as the subject of authority have done something good, right? That is a good act to obey authority, even if it seems a little bit like trivial, right? But where the line, Patrick, is, it's a little bit gray. I mean, I think we would all say that the toast thing is a little ridiculous. But but it also like, I don't know, like you're hanging out with this friend that, it means you're not home to make me dinner. So therefore, I command you to be home. Like that's too far, right? So it would just depend. The other part of it, right, is, and sometimes people with this verse get into like, oh, it's just spiritual authority. It's not just spiritual authority, but spiritual authority is really, really important, right? Because the man keeps his wife protected, right? And so because, and including holiness, right? What is the ultimate common good? What is everyone's common good? God, right? And so that's why the husband is the spiritual leader of his household, because he is responsible for the common good of his family, and the ultimate common good is God himself, right? So the wife would defer in all things spiritual to the husband. Again, assuming it's good, all that, okay? And in men, you got to own that. Like, you got to own the fact that you have to be a saint so that your family can hide in the shadow of your wings, right? Yes, Ryan.
Like, oh, the man in charge of the woman under the mission of the man. The mission be what Christ did. It's the man's mission is to die out of love, sacrifice for the woman. So being under the mission is like the woman simply that. But you said that like wives of the husbands is good for spiritual protection. I'll accept it. Can you explain how?
All right, how? Go ahead, Connor. I'm trying to think about a good example, but maybe you have one, because we've had a lot of conversations about this. So you can.
I think it comes down to, so I think the first thing to start with is like, Catholicism is a patriarchal religion. Like we all, the cult of the father, and not to say that you don't obviously don't worship God, but in the sense of like, we have always gone back to the idea that the father is like the father is God because we worship. And so because of that authority, which also comes from God, is what keeps the demons obey, because demons have to obey God. That's ultimately like why priests, let's say, like the name of Christ, because he has the authority over the demons and he has the ability to kind of like send them forth. So in that way, marriage especially, because it's the natural image of the Trinity, and it's also a bond sanctified by sacrament. There is a spiritual dimension that goes beyond the natural one, to the point that the authority is vested with let's say, a certain degree of the authority is vested with it leads protection. It gives the devil knows that he has to, because he has to respect God's order, he has to go through the husband first. If he can't get through the husband, he can't get to the rest of them. And you see this kind of in a.
And by the way, word subordinate has the word order in it, right? So to be in under the order of, right? The order that is made of the family. Go ahead, Connor.
So I think continuing that, like when there's proper order, and we all operate on just think of a similar way in the church. Like when you disobey the church, you step yourself outside of the church, you step outside of her spiritual protection for yourself in mortal sin, and you end up in life spiritual protection. In a smaller way, when there's right order, the devil knows he has to eventually respect God's order, which means he has to respect the husband. If the husband doesn't let him in, he won't get in. And that means he also has additional power over, just like priests of our Father, because that authority over all of us. We can bless and pray over in a more efficacious way. Now, in addition to the fact that the church, the husband can do the same thing to his wife. So I think the reason it lets protection is because by submitting to the husband, you're submitting to God, and that brings protection with it. If you don't, you're stepping outside like God's proper order, which means you're kind of saying, well, I want to go my own way. And that leads to, that's why I say, not just get there. You don't have the benefit of God's like protected order. So I'd say to a certain degree, maybe it's that way because for all the reasons we discussed, like the husband authority. I mean, just the same way you think of like, again, like a natural analogy, like parents make rules for their kids and they break the rules. They step outside like the protections. Parents put those rules up for protection. So they step outside of that, they step outside of like the protective bounds with parents. It's different, obviously, with the husband. It's not like a parent-child relationship, and it's not necessarily rules, but does that make sense?
So rephrase your question, Ryan, and I can answer because I think it was too broad when you asked it. Like, narrow the focus a little bit. I mean, I could tell you what it looks like, but I don't know if that's really what you're asking.
I think Connor mostly was able to answer
Yeah. So remember, when you submit, wives submit to their husband as to Christ, right? So it's really they're submitting to Christ. Like that's what I was saying about them not like always never worrying about like if you obey someone you're supposed to obey, whether it's too trivial of a thing because you've obeyed Christ ultimately because he's the one who set that in. And then like, I mean, I've told my boys this many times. Like when you disobey, you step outside of my protection. I can't protect you any longer. You've decided you don't need the protection of your father, and things happen. And that's a really important thing because part of the father's mission is to keep order in the family, right? He corrects the child because you're creating chaos. You're creating disorder in the family. We need to fix that, right? But the spiritual authority piece, the authority that that a father has it's a very real thing when it comes to like demonic influence. That in essence, I mean, I know I've shared the story with you guys before about like our youngest son was being pretty much tormented by demons. And as soon as I discerned what was going on, the next night I laid on the floor in front of his crib and nothing happened because I just said, like, you're going to have to go through me to get to him. And that was the end of it. And that didn't happen again. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if it helps to think of it in terms of Christ and the church, right? So Christ is the one who offers spiritual protection to the church. But the same thing, when, spiritual attacks happen, they can very quickly end when the father steps in and starts praying. When he's willing to kind of put himself on the line to go, okay, hold on, like you're going to have to go through me. And again, like there's situations where that has happened. And it also gives you authority to do things like you bless your children, you can bless your wife, You can command, command demons to leave, just as if it was yourself, because you have authority. And you can't do that for anybody else. So that, again, like learning the spiritual warfare aspects of the family, which we could talk about another time, but that's a really important thing to grasp because people don't necessarily understand that is a real thing, and you can really change your whole family dynamic by just even recognizing it. Go ahead, Megan.
The claim to flame is not like mid to like saying if the woman in the house gets the house. That's like the quote by other exorcists. It's in a whole process. Like even if it's a virtuous man, what is so
Yeah, so you're really asking two things. So the first thing is like, normally if if the father is compromised in some way, the children end up compromised too, because he's ceded authority over, right? So a father, for example, very often a father who is addicted to pornography, at the very least, his children end up addicted to pornography. And the very worst, the children can end up possessed, right? Through no fault of their own, which I'll get to is your second part of your question, right? The no fault of your own, right? Just as like healthy people get sick for God's mysterious reasons, why that happens to some people and not to others, even people who are saints or holy, that's in God's providence why he allows those things to happen. Ultimately is for his glory. But in a certain respect, it's to show that, show the devil that, he can't corrupt something that is good, right? No, a wife cannot bless the husband, but she can bless her children. Yeah, so I would say in general, the answer to your question is yes. But if for some reason something more than just your ordinary sort of spiritual attacks, like if a woman were to discern somehow that, the child was seriously oppressed or obsessed or even possessed. No, normally it's like, it would be certain things that like, yeah. No, so a father cannot do like a full-blown like exorcism. Can a father pray that like a demon that is doing some sort of extraordinary, tempting or even tormenting of a child, can he pray that the demon leave? Yes, just like you could pray for yourself, right, for that to happen. But in general, that's not a good idea.
Is that even after the child is an adult?
Yeah, so are you asking, can a father bless his adult son? Is that what you're saying?
The blessing, and then I guess the praying against the spiritual attack.
Yeah, I would say yes, for sure, right? I mean, there's definitely biblical examples of like fathers blessing in a spiritual authority way adult children. So I would say that does not cease. The spiritual authority of a father for a son, I don't think necessarily changes based on the age. Yes, Michael. It would be a little awkward in that sense, but still the father is still his father, right? And most often you will see, like, for the same reason that, like, if Dominic became a priest, I still would call him Dominic. I would not call him Father Dominic, because that natural relationship trumps now I might talk about him, like I might say, hey, Father Dominic says blah blah blah, but to his face I would not call him Father Dominic, because oh yeah, he could definitely, because he's a priest, right? So it's a supernatural vocation, but it doesn't trump, like, so this is one of the reasons why, like, a priest can't tell you what to do with your children, right? Again, assuming that, like, it's you can go against something if you disagree. For example, like, priest tells you to do something good and you have good reasons to disagree with it, like, priests cannot trump a father's authority over his family. Okay. That's a good question. I don't know. I never really thought about that. I would say that because it's equals, I would say yes, you actually probably would, but it might be just awkward based on relation. Like, I don't think it would be impious to call your brother who's a priest by their name because of the natural relationship, right? Just like, some kids will call like if their uncle's a priest, they'll still call them Uncle John or whatever, right? As long as it's not like meant to be impious in some way, I don't think necessarily. Right. Wow. Okay. Yeah. All right. Foundation of the family is marriage. All right. So foundation of society is a family. We already sort of hinted at the fact that marriage was the foundation of the family. The conjugal community is established upon the consent of the spouses. Marriage and the family are ordered to the good of the spouses since the procreation and education of children. The love of the spouses and the beginning of children create among members of the same family personal relationships and primordial responsibilities. All right, so I'll do the same sort of thing where we ask the question, what is marriage? And we'll kind of summarize marriage as a lifelong communion. Remember that use of the word communion of a man and a woman established by their free consent for the sake of the generation and education of children. All right, so remember when we define terms, remember I talked about genus and species, right? Like what is the thing, what group does it belong to, and then what's its specific difference, right? And so what makes marriage different from any other relationship? Vows would be part of it for sure, right? So the free consent in the definition, right? Go ahead, Patrick. It's a communion. But we did say that like families are communions, right? And although they're founded on marriage, it's still, so that would be the genus, right? It's a relationship based on a communion, sharing of a life. But what's its specific, what makes it different than say the parent-child relationship or the, or like friendship, for example?
I think part of it's just like that full gift of self. I mean, it's like if your boss is like, I need you to tell me when you think you can get this done. You're like, all right, 2 weeks, boss, but then something really bad medically happens to your wife, then like, you got to take care of your wife, it's like, but if it's like, it just trumps, it's like, you wouldn't do that in any other relationship where you just like always need to go and help that person kind of deal,
Okay, so the gift of self is an integral piece of it. Although I don't know if that would be necessarily in the definition. Because you could still have a marriage without somebody being willing to do that, right? So there has to be something in it. That would be a marriage well lived. That's a good marriage, but the fact that it isn't necessarily needed for it to be a marriage at all. Yes, Patrick.
I think that it's sort of like to specify my role more maybe in free consenting communion because the parent and child relationship isn't free consenting.
Okay.
And then like the friend relationship is really, I think it'd be sort of.
Okay, so the vows so the vows would definitely be an important part with the fact that it's a shared life. Yes, Ryan. Okay, so exclusive, is that again, is that a necessary, is that could you still have a marriage if they weren't exclusive? Could they, so she said that it's an exclusive relationship. I'm just trying to get at definitions, right? Well, I just want to know what makes it different than any other relationship, because you could still have a marriage where they weren't exclusive with each other, right? It would still be, you would still say, okay, they're married, right? So there has to be something more to it than that. Again, that would be a bad marriage, but a marriage it would still be. Yes. Well, yeah, so Erin said it really softly, but I want her to say it again now so that everyone can hear it. Yeah, it's ordered towards children. It's for the sake of the generation and education of children. That is what makes it unique, right? That is what makes marriage a marriage. All right. Yes, and so this is gonna flip things around a little bit because we've grown up in a culture where it's really all about love, right? Just is love necessary for marriage? Hopefully, after what I've said so far, you would say no, not necessarily. Good marriage, yes, but is it necessary? Does it make a marriage? Yes, yes. Go ahead. What was your question?
So we're talking about like, we understand like within the Catholic Church that marriage is a sacrament, right? And outside, like I'm just kind of thinking about this because one of my roommates is Protestant and is getting married in January. So even though that like isn't like Protestant marriages, the Catholic Church would consider like sacramental in the way.
Yeah, so if they're both baptized because they bestow the sacrament upon each other, it's a sacramental marriage, right? So the ministers of the sacrament of marriage are the spouses.
Okay,
So what happens like in someone who's like, let's just say somebody's married in a Protestant church and they come into the Catholic Church, what the Catholic Church does is what's called convalidation, which basically says, we just want to make sure it was a valid marriage.
okay. But so is there like any between two baptized people, whether they're both Protestant or both Catholic, is there any effective difference between those marriages given that like what happens with the like?
No, objectively, no, right? I mean, subjectively it would be, but objectively, no. Yes, go ahead. So objectively, in the sense of like, it's still a sacrament, still grace present. Subjectively, like to use a sacrament, you kind of got to know it's a sacrament, right? So the subjects of that receive the sacrament may be in a totally different place, right? That's what I mean by that. Yes.
Two questions to get into the weeds about a little bit. Let's say those two Protestants were, entering a lifelong covenant dissolvable only by divorce. Would that still be a valid marriage if they entered in with this idea that they could get out of it?
I think that's a canonical question, like that hasn't been well answered. I don't have an answer to it per se, right? Like if someone doesn't realize that marriage is like indissoluble, does that mean that they can even validly marry? I don't know, right? Like that's.
The second question is, so we say for the sake of the generation education of children, let's say there were a couple who got married and then, realized they couldn't have a kid or something like that, or because obviously the church used the people who.
I already anticipated. Yeah, I already anticipated your question. So we'll come back to your question in a second. All right, so I do want to go back here though, because it's a really important thing, right? Notice I guess I should have italicized it. The subtlety in the definition of for the sake of the generation and education of children.
For the generation of education.
No.
Sake is that.
Yeah, for the sake of it, right? That's what it's ordered to, even if not every time it achieves that end, right? That is its end. It's its final cause, but it doesn't necessarily have to, nor does it have to be the individual's motives for being married. This is what marriage objectively is for. Right now, I might marry for love, and that's okay, and that's good. Right? There's nothing wrong with that. Right? You should love the person you marry, but marriage is a thing, an objective thing, that no matter what my motivation is or what my feelings are, or why I decided to get married, that does not change what the objective thing is, right? And that's why I went to such pains to say, okay, like exclusivity. Well, that's what a good marriage is, but it isn't marriage. That isn't what makes marriage marriage. Understanding that is really important because that means marriage has this objective whatness about it, right? Because it's a natural thing. All right, so let's go to the first objection because this is pretty much.
Rob, it seems
Yes.
like you're, I don't know, kind of saying like you get married and then if you start like doing everything wrong, like you're still married. Like, but don't you still need some of those like intentions and things in order to actually enter into the valid like sacramental marriage? Like you kind of
as long as you had those intentions when you got married.
Yes, right.
But if you change, like for example, you change your mind or something, yeah. So, but that all comes into the free consent part, right? Like understanding what you're actually consenting to is an important part of it. Don't get me wrong.
Mm-hmm.
I just meant it in the sense of like, if somebody, validly understands, okay, like marriage is exclusive, but then I decide that like, you know what, my marriage doesn't need to be exclusive. That doesn't cease to be marriage was my only point.
Gotcha.
It wasn't just like, the vows are something, I mean, a little bit different in the sense of like what you're promising is all tied up with the fact, like every vow is really ordered towards for the sake of the procreation and education of children. Like every vow, you can play like the Kevin Bacon game and keep connecting them back to the end because they're all meant to be like material causes. You guys looked at me like, you guys don't know what the Kevin Bacon game is?
No.
Okay, so the Kevin Bacon game is, oh my gosh, I feel like it. Dom, do you know the Kevin Bacon game? Uh-oh. All right, so, all right, that's on me, I guess. So the Kevin Bacon game is, you guys know who Kevin Bacon is, right? He's an actor, right? He's been in a ton of movies, right? And you can name an actor and from 5 steps, connecting actors, you can get to Kevin Bacon. Yeah. So you could get, like you'd go, okay, like I don't know. Nicole Kidman was in this movie with Tom Cruise, who was in A Few Good Men with Kevin Bacon. Like that's how you play, you like connect it back. And you can almost like it, I guess I'm totally dating myself by doing that, but it's like a game where you just go, okay, name an actor and then see if you can connect with Kevin Bacon. It's really hard to not get there with 5. Like I've been playing this game for years and I don't think I've ever come up with someone that I could get. Now there might be now that you could do like an actor, like a new act, like you got a new actor now, you might be able to do it. But it usually is because he's been in a couple of movies that had a lot of people in them. Maybe, I don't know. That could be the case. Don't ruin the Kevin Bacon with me, please. Anyway, I'll have to come up with a different, I guess I can't use that anymore. Anyway, so everything connects back to, I totally forgot my point now. Everything connects, the vows themselves connect back to the fact that it's for the sake. All right, so first objection is Connor's objection. Elderly and infertile couples are unable to beget children, but they can still get married. Everybody agrees with that, right? Therefore, marriage cannot be for the sake of generating children, ... And therefore, persons of the same sex can marry. Okay, this is legitimate. This is like their argument that they use, right? What's wrong with that? Like, we should be able to answer this. Go ahead, Connor. And then Ryan, you tag team.
The social form of marriage, like what marriage is still ordered towards the procreation of children. The material that is there can actually be ordered towards procreation of children, even if it is not ever actualized, while people that are the same sex cannot, the material cannot be ordered towards that.
Okay, so is a soldier still a soldier if he never fights in a war? Yeah. I knew Megan would have a nickname for it. Go ahead, Ryan. Yeah, there is that too, right? Like it can happen.
Needs to be there. It just has to be working perfectly because God can work with it.
All right, so an analogy will help, right? Is an eye that is blind for the sake of seeing? Is the fact that the mouth can't see, the mouth is unable to see, can you say that the mouth, there's something wrong with the mouth? No, right? It's not ordered to that. It's not for the sake of that, right? And so, in other words, just because something is for the sake of something else, it can be broken, right? So what they're doing is equivocating on the term unable, right? In one sense, we mean unable in the sense of they have the inherent capacity to, but the thing doesn't work, right? Yes, right. So yeah, if we were to use Thomistic terms, we would say that a gay couple does not have the ability to reproduce in potency. An infertile couple does, right? Even if it's never actualized. Yeah, potency just means it has the inherent potential to do something. We're just geeking out a little bit. Somebody brings up a Thomistic term, I'm happy. Yeah, so that's it. So that is a common thing, right? Equivocation. It's a logical fallacy. right? The word unable means two different things, right? Like, would we say that a puppy that is, I mean, a dog that's unable to have puppies and a cow that's unable to have puppies, both the same thing? Well, that's what it's saying, right? So you would never expect it. No, we would say, well, cows don't have puppies, right? They're unable in a different way, right? A puppy could be neutered or spayed. I mean, a dog could be neutered or spayed, like they had the capacity to do it. But we never say a cow has the capacity to have a puppy. Right? That's the whole point. All right, so that's the first objection. Second objection is this: marriage is not something natural, but a social construct. I'm sure each of you have heard that in your classes. How do you respond? Go ahead, Ryan.
Is a very natural life. And then have sex and they conceive and have a child. Well, the best way for the child to be raised is if, like, the mom's kind of stuck with the child, right? The best way for the child to be raised in a healthy environment is if the man is required to stay. It's a very natural flow of creating the marriage structure.
Yeah, so like what you're saying is actually one of the arguments that a lot of like social psychologists give about the importance of love between the spouses, because it's the love for the mother that keeps the father linked to the children, like Trinitarian, right? Like the father hangs around, like whatever he thinks of his children, it's his love for the mother that keeps him linked. That's why good marriages are based on the love between the spouses, right? So it's very Trinitarian. Remember, we talked about that whole social construct thing, that the first way to sort of tackle it is to go, okay, that's fine if you say it's a social construct, but why is it constructed the way it is? Because all you've done is kick the road down, the can down the road a little bit. Okay, so, but the point is, if we begin to go back to our natural law discussion of things where we talk about, okay, about desires, right? We all have an inherent desire to reproduce. Right? That's part of written into us. And it's natural. And so by definition, those things that are naturally good for us, we're naturally inclined towards, right? And so sexual desire is clearly ordered towards some good, right? What is that good that is ordered towards?
Babies.
Okay, so yes, babies, right? I think Connor's just got, I mean, Erin's just got one answer today. Both times she's said the same word and that's the answer. So the good that it's ordered to, right? We say sexual desire is ordered towards something good. The good that it's ordered towards is the child, right? And the way to convince someone of that is to just simply ask the question, although sometimes you get disturbing answers. Which is better, the child that's conceived or the pleasure that you had in conceiving them? Yeah, hopefully the child, right? Yeah, right. Like sometimes if somebody answers differently, that's a little disturbing, right? And so the way to weed through that is to go, okay, well, which is the better? Well, that must be what it's ordered to the higher things, right? Then if the child in and of itself is a good, then the thriving of the child is a good, and thus a stable marriage is a good and natural thing. Okay.
I hope this isn't too off topic, but like I was thinking, kind of following a question from last week, like Pope St. John Paul II, you quoted him saying, chastity is not a long no, it's a yes, of which many no's are a consequence. So like, how does that statement work for like a celibate priest or religious or,
Well, I mean, it's still the same thing where it's just chastity is basically a yes to the gift of self and the priesthood. Right, and then all the no's attached to it. Is that kind of what you're asking?
Yeah, I think so.
Erin, I'm going to defer on your IVF question to when we do reproduction. in 3 weeks or whatever it is. Okay, Ryan, what was your question?
So for people who either like acknowledge the good of children, or just simply like their response just is like, oh, you have to adopt kids and that's visible and maybe like there's a big skill like that's perfectly fine. And then what like the extreme version of that of I don't want kids are a burden, kids are a bad. How do you?
Yeah, those are words from a broken person, right? Like the thinking that that somehow seeing other people as burdens, like that's somebody who's just like something's broken, right? And so I probably wouldn't hound that person trying to figure out why you don't think that like. And those people are coming more and more, like becoming more and more. I'm sure you encounter many more of them now, right? And some of that is just because of their own brokenness and upbringing. They're like, well, I would never bring people into the world given the way things are, right? And so in order to have a really good conversation with them, you got to back them up to find out like why they look at the world that way, right? Yes.
You know what I'm going with this?
Well, I know that like that every year I hear about how much a child costs. Like if you have a child this year, and in the end, you
It's like, in that, would you just say, yes, you have to be somewhat financially prepared for a child, but like also feel like the sole point of the child is not to burden financially.
yeah. I mean, the question would,
Wouldn't that feel like that's a spot of greed?
yeah, well,
Leaving the child to consumers, we're all consumers, all consumers. So like, that's not wrong.
yeah, you want to move people off that consumer mentality and get them more thinking in terms of like, can you really put a price tag on love? Like,
Well, yeah, but like, you're not saying it's like, it's not inherently wrong to say that like, I consume.
you know, no, not necessarily. You
But,
just
like,
don't want to
that's
identify that.
bad.
If that's the primary identity you're giving to someone, which is what they're doing, right? Like that is a facet of our existence, but it's nowhere tied to our identity. Yeah.
And so like, wait, is that so wrong to not have a child? Wait, is it so wrong to have a child?
Yeah, I mean, so what is the,
That's my question, is like, why is it so wrong to be a consumer in this food? Why do you do this?
yeah, I mean, a little bit. I mean, that will, some of that is again, fallout from the Industrial Revolution, right? Because there were economic reasons to have children, right? And have large families. Yeah, but it will swing back the other way when people are dying all by themselves like that and have no. Yeah, well, some of that is like, there's also because of, you know, they can get paid for having kids too, right? Yeah.
Which is like, kind of, we're not gonna get into probably like this bad statement, but like basically like saying like, I was just wondering this is like, is it so wrong to call something? Why is it so bad?
Yeah, I would say that is not, I mean, there's nothing wrong with being a consumer. It's just not part of our identity.
Okay, thank you.
All right, I'm gonna slide through some of these slides. We'll come back to some of this stuff. So I do want to, I got 3 more slides I want to go through. So education of children, just to be clear, does not cease when you kick the kids out of the house, right? Because you continue to educate children and how to be virtuous, even into old age, right? That never ceases. Not what that's what I was saying about like there is an authority as a teacher that a parent has all the way through. And that's St. Thomas Aquinas. We will come back to divorce when we Trying to think about 615. All right, let's go to this and then we'll finish with this. So St. John Paul II in Familiaris Consortio, which is his apostolic exhortation to the family, said, loving the family means identifying the dangers and the evils that menace it in order to overcome them. So in other words, identifying what the evils that are attacking the family, right? So we started out talking about Our Lady of, or at least Sister Lucia, and identifying the attacks. Let's be a little more specific about very specific. Our Lady of Fatima told Sister Lucia that Russia will spread its errors throughout the world, raising up wars and persecutions of the church. The good will be martyred, the Holy Father will have much to suffer, and the various nations will be annihilated. What are the errors of Russia? Maybe, is it just communism or is there's something more? Because communism sort of has been tried, doesn't really work that great. Michael said Marxism.
Yeah, well, that's what I mean.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so ultimately, right, like what makes Marxism such a dangerous error is that it tries to rewrite history and rewrite human nature, right? So Marx says all history, yes, and it is tied into feminism too, for sure. In fact, again, to play the game, you can almost take every error that we have currently in our society and map it back to Karl Marx. All right. Because yes. Yeah, so okay. Let's see. Well, so the errors upon which Russia is based are Marxist. Yeah, so let me give the crash course in Marxism real quick. So Marxism says essentially that all of history can be marked by conflict, right? And in essence, what Marx says is, okay, there's just one more conflict left. And that's between capitalists and the bourgeoisie. And so what he basically says is, or the capitalists and the workers, right? And he basically says, okay, what happens is throughout history, there's this conflict between A and B. And then after the conflict, they come together. So there's this thesis, and then there's this antithesis, and then history keeps moving that way. So conflict, resolution, history moves on, right? And so he says, okay, there's one conflict left. It's between the workers and the bourgeoisie, all right? And so he's basically capital, and the synthesis of those things will be communism, which is this utopic situation in which there's no need for government, not that everybody just gets along. Great, and there might be a few bumps along the way to get there. You know, like you have to take private property from people, and yeah, I'm sure they'll be fine with it. There'll be no wars or anything like that. But essentially, the errors, though, ultimately, because it's demonic, is trying to remake human nature. Right? It's trying to rewrite what human beings are, right? So starting with the first step in the process, that all of history is conflict, right? Well, you've just erased complementarity between men and women, right? Key important, right? Because now what happens? Well, Marxists say, history is really about oppressor versus oppressed. Insert oppressor, insert oppressed. Here's how you read everything, right? This is critical theory. This is how it all works, right? And the critical theory guy says, okay, well, actually, you got to rewrite it. We have to go back and rewrite history because it was just written by the oppressors, right? And because the oppressors wrote it, it's false, and so you end up with something like the 1619 Project, which says It was all just about, they were just trying to, it was just a cover for slavery because they were oppressing slaves. All right, and that's Marxism. All right, so every time you see, like, there's a victim class, right? And then there's a victimizer. That's Marxism. Right? And that's what our entire culture is built upon. Well, the family is a very like unequal society. Got to be broken up. You can't have authority if like because parents, according to Freud, right? Parents are oppressing children. Right? They're throwing, you know, they mess up their super ego and they're throwing all these ideas on the kids and they're not letting them be themselves and you know, all these repressive things, right? So you see like where this is all going, right? And so every time we have to identify, okay, anytime you see victimizer versus victim, which is our entire culture, that's Marxism. Those are the errors of Marxism. Yes, because it's a radical equality, right? It allows no, so a Marxist would say anything hierarchical is bad, right? And God says, actually, the world creation was made hierarchical, right? So everything has to be radically equal. All right, that's Marxism. All right, and you can see how destructive that is. Yeah. Yes. And so those are the errors of Russia. Okay, and so Marx or Engels here in the quote, he says the first division of labor. So again, he's making it about oppress and oppressor. Is that between man and woman for the propagation of children. Marxism demands the abolition of the monogamous family as the economic unit of society. So where's the first place that the devil wanted to go? What was his first shot? Well, destroy the family by destroying the hierarchical structure of the family, right? If you really want to understand what Marxism is, Pope Pius XI wrote an encyclical on it called Divini Redemptoris, and it's the best 10-page summary of Marxism probably ever written. But what he brings out in it, which is this long quote here, which I won't necessarily read, is how the attacks of Marxism attack, in a certain sense, man's identity by attacking the two places that where man most images God. You know, those two places are, right? Procreation and work, right? If you can flip those things over, you can destroy man's ability to see the image of God, right? And because those are the two things that, again, what does God attach the curses of the fall to? Those two things, right? To let us, to remind us of how important those are, right? And only Jesus can overcome the fall. Marxism says, oh, no, we can actually make a society that overcomes it. We can build something that overcomes the fall, right? And that's totally from the pits of hell. All right, so understanding then that even the simplest Marxist idea is meant to be an attack on the family and marriage, we have to reject it wholesale. All right, we have to be able to identify it and then reject it. And there's really, in a certain sense, there's no compromising with it because it's not of human origin. All right, and this one of the things that Pope Pius XI says, he calls it a satanic scourge, which is in this encyclical. I didn't actually have the, but understand that the whole shift that I talked about from the family as the unit of society versus the individual, that's Marxism, right? Individual becomes a cog in society, all right? And then the dignity of the human person is gone, all of those things. All right, questions? I'm gonna stop there. All the other stuff I can cover when we do.
Return to my earlier question about the village mentality. Would you just say that that's kind of like Marxism again?
Yes, I would say it's absolutely that, right? Because one of the things that one of their solutions is to is essentially to take the children out of the family